Hello, scholars. Well, today we're going to take a look at another story in the story of the world. So we're going to open our books to chapter 2, which I believe begins on page 9. And we're going to continue on, because we already heard about Craith, to page 13, where it talks about barbarians come to Britain. You can follow along in your book, or you can just sit back and listen as I read to you from Barbarians Come to Britain. The Celts who lived in Britain didn't all belong to the same kingdom, and they didn't all obey the same king. Britain was full of different tribes of Celts, and each tribe followed a different king. Old stories tell us that one of these kings was named Vortigern. Vortigern ruled a wealthy, powerful tribe of Celts in the middle of Britain. His people obeyed him, and the warriors who fought for him followed his commands. But Vortigern still wasn't happy. Other tribes of Celts from up north kept attacking his kingdom, and Vortigern was tired of fighting them off. He wanted help. Vortigern sent a message across the North Sea to barbarian tribes called the Angles and the Saxons. "Come and help me fight against my enemies," he said. "If you do, I will give you land to live on here in Britain." So the Angles and the Saxons came across the North Sea into Britain and helped Vortigern fight his enemies. They liked Britain, so they settled down and stayed there. They sent word back to their families and friends. "Come live in Britain with us. There's plenty of room here." So more and more Angles and Saxons sailed across the North Sea into the country and filled up the whole middle part of Britain with Angles and Saxons. The Celts didn't like all these barbarians in their country, but there were so many Angles and Saxons that they couldn't drive them all out. Soon the south and east part of Britain was completely occupied by Angles and Saxons. They divided the land into 7 kingdoms. Today we call this part of Britain England, a name that comes from the word Angle. We call the people who live there Anglo-Saxons. So today, this is England, this bottom part. Back then it was part of Britain. They called it England from the word angle. Poor Celts. First the Romans attacked them. Now the Anglo-Saxons had driven them out of their own land. Some of the Celts decided to make the best of it. They married the Anglo-Saxons and lived with them in peace. But other Celts retreated up into the north and west of Britain to live by themselves. Today we call the countries where the Celts live Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Do you remember that the Celts told stories to each other rather than writing them down? The Angles and the Saxons didn't do very much writing either. They didn't write down their history, they didn't write down their stories, and they didn't keep records of what they did every day. So although we know that the Angles and Saxons lived in England for a long time, we don't know what they did during all those years. This time in England is called the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. It is a dark time to us because we can't read about what happened in the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The only stories that we have from this time are stories that were passed down from one bard to the next by word of mouth. Do you remember when we talked about bards? Back here, bards were specially trained singers that sang and told stories about great warriors. Bards told about warriors, chieftains, tribes, battles, heroes of long ago. They were in song or prose because it's easier for your brain to remember them that way. Well, just like the Celts had Craith, the Anglo and Saxons had Beowulf, the hero. The Anglo-Saxons told stories about their heroes just as the Celts did. One of these stories was about a monster named Grendel, and the great warrior who conquered him, Beowulf. The story of Beowulf is one of the oldest stories in the English language. It may have been told and retold for many years before it was finally written down. The story was written in poetry because poetry was easier to remember and perform for other people. Remember, poetry has a rhythm and a rhyme. We try to find those rhyming pairs to help us with the rhythm and the rhyme. Poems and songs are easy to remember, easier to remember and perform for other people. The whole story of Beowulf is long and complicated, but here is a shorter version of the story for you to listen to. Before I share that with you, here is my book on Beowulf, retold by Roseberry Sutcliffe. So it's a little bit longer. It's not as long as some stories I've seen and read, but you can see that it is a much longer version than what we're going to read. It has some pictures of the monster Grendel, Beowulf, Hrothgar's Hall, which we'll hear about. Ooh, it looks like a Viking ship, the Danish shore, the seafarers. And here's like they're sitting around listening to a story, just like you are. So here is my book, Beowulf. You can check out Beowulf. It's a little complicated, uses harder language to understand than what they've done here, but if you like the story, maybe you'll want to check it out. So let's see what they talk about in our book, Beowulf. Hrothgar was king of a whole host of men who fought for King Hrothgar again and again. Their strength and their courage was well known to all, so Hrothgar decided to build them a hall. It was hung all with tapestries, roofed all with slate, heated by fires enormously great. Each night of the week his men gathered there to feast and to sing and to put away care. Then they unrolled their blankets, slept next to the fire, while torchlight streamed out from the hall's highest spire. Now this hall of the king stood high on high solid ground, with safe friendly fields and great houses all round. But far, far away over the swampland and heath lived a monster named Grendel with sharp claws and teeth. He was hairy and hideous, tall as 2 trees. The biggest of men only came to his knees. He crawled up to the hall while the weary men slept, eased open the door, and through it he crept. He picked up a warrior and ate him right there, then seized 15 more and ran off like a hare. The men tried to follow his tracks on the ground, but soon came to a river where none could be found. In the morning the warriors mourned their dead friend and swore they would bring these attacks to an end. Do you hear the rhyme? But although in the daytime they wanted to fight, their courage all trickled away in the night. Again and again Grendel broke through the door, pounced into the crowd, and ate up some more. Of the men gathered there, and day after day, Hrothgar's warriors failed to keep him away. They were tired and frightened and lost all their pride as news of their troubles spread out far and wide. Then Beowulf, the mightiest man in the earth, a fierce, famous fighter of very great worth, heard that Grendel attacked Hrothgar's hall every night, and that Hrothgar's strong fighters were too scared to fight. He gathered his clan with their sharp swords and spears and set off for the hall where the men nursed their fears. Hrothgar was glad to see all these strong men. He thanked them for coming again and again. He said to them, "Welcome, Beowulf and all. Tonight all of you can sleep in my hall. When the monster arrives with his heart set on sin, he will find you in there with all of your kin. You can fight with him then. Do you need anything? Sharper swords?" But Beowulf said to the king, "Don't worry, we'll stay here with never a care. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be fair to use swords to conquer the beast from the heath. He doesn't have weapons, just claws and his teeth. So I'll take off my armor and leave off my sword and fight with bare hands. Otherwise I'd be bored. Beowulf and his men then lay down on the floor, turned out the lights, and locked the great door. They waited for Grendel, pretending to sleep. Then out of the darkness so thick and so deep came the sound of the monster approaching the hall. He howled and brought fear to the hearts of them all. The door made of iron was closed, locked, and barred, but the monster destroyed it without breathing hard. He grabbed a plump warrior, got ready to feast, but Beowulf seized the arm of the beast and started to twist it with all of his might. So then Grendel turned on him, ready to fight. But Beowulf twisted the arm yet again, while Grendel howled out with the terrible pain. He screamed and he howled, but he still couldn't flee. Beowulf's muscles were something to see. Then Beowulf pulled once again on the arm and popped off at once, causing Grendel great harm. Yelping, he galloped right out of the door, leaving his arm lying there on the floor. When the warriors saw what their leader had done, they cheered. Then they followed where Grendel had run. The monster's great tracks led them down to a pool where the dank mist had settled all slimy and cool. O'er the water's black surface engulfed there they found the body of Grendel, who jumped in and drowned. "He is dead," they rejoiced. "Let's have a great feast. No more will we dread the approach of the beast." So with mirth and great glee, they brought food to the hall, and they hung Grendel's arm way up high on the wall. And they ate, drank, and sang till the evening grew old. Then Hrothgar gave Beowulf armor of gold. And a bard lauded Beowulf, mighty of hand, and his fame was eternally sung in that land. So the bards learned the story, and forever it has been told in England and beyond, even into my library, where I have Beowulf. Take a quick look at those pictures again. You might like to see them. See if you can relate to any of the story. Telling the story, the Danish sword, chapter 2. Hrothgar's talking, seeing they're his people. Hrothgar's hall, we just read about that. Had a great hall where people came. Grendel, there's Grendel. Remember, he was tall, the men only came up to his knees. Came and he ate the warriors one by one. They could not get him to leave. Then the terror came again. Worried about Grendel fighting Beowulf. He won. In this story, Beowulf had home, I believe. And then eventually Beowulf dies too, but not while he was fighting Grendel. He made a name for himself as being the great warrior Beowulf. There's a story that you might want to check out and share. Well, until next time, go out and do great things.